probably get going. A few minutes late, but that's fine. Continuing off from a month ago, which will then lead to continuing off to a month from now, we've been kind of working our way through the book, Muscle and a Shovel. I keep saying muscle and shovel. It's muscle and a shovel. Maybe because I think it's a better title. I don't know. We left off with a pretty involved one last time with him relating all kinds of religious doctrinal problems, including an examination of tulip with Calvinism. This time around, we're in chapters 22 through 24, but 23 is like 2 pages wide. It really is kind of setting up, and a lot of this is actually setting up what will come in 25 on, a series of studies. But we have our protag of Mike. We have Randall, who is the one he is, oh, that's not supposed to be an H. The one he's, the one who's studying with him. He has been really frustrated with, religious division, the ones he's been interacting with. It's finding that a lot of the groups and places don't actually, study much, right? He ran into that situation with the Lutheran who told him about John the Baptist having founded the Baptist church, which wasn't true. Let me just see this real quick. Come on. So he opens chapter 22 with a question. Have you ever been fed up, like frustrated and angry? He kind of hits on that pretty hard. I'm trying to think of some of the phrasing he uses here. He was fed up with churches and so-called Christians in general. He and his wife Jeanette had been going a lot of different places. They were trying to do the shotgun approach of getting everyone. They got kicked out of a community church for being too biblical. And they'd visited everywhere. They were fed up. They were burned out. They were ready to take a break. And this is one of those things that can happen, even with the well-meaning, where if you can't seem to find a place that seems to be doing anything close to right, you just think, well, maybe no one is, and you want to give up. And in some communities, there aren't examples of something that's right, and that's sad. Unless you want to start doing it yourself at home, and he wouldn't know how to do that yet. Every place claimed to study one Bible and for people to be Christians and to have unity. But he uses this phrase, and it's kind of the theme of chapter 22, unity was a joke. And the reason for that is they had substituted, well, the way he kind of, I'm just trying to relate the way, I don't want to steal from him. He relates basically the idea that they had traded unity for tolerance. Does that sound in any way, you understand what I mean with that? What? Unity for what? Tolerance. Does that make some kind of sense? Depends on who's tolerant. I suppose. Unity versus tolerance. Okay. What's the difference between the two? Okay. I guess it's going to depend on how you want to define them. The world does games. But even in the correct forming, unity is a connection. It's a oneness of mind, a oneness of purpose. And the connection has to be more than just association. One can be connected, but they're not necessarily unified, right?
Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane was praying for unity so that the world would be convinced that his followers
That is true. He actually relates that here, because when he compares unity and tolerance and describes what they're doing as being tolerant of one another, even though they're of different opinions. Like, they have disparate views, and they'll badmouth one another, but then claim that they're all one in Christ, which is illogical. It just doesn't work. It doesn't fit. An example that an instructor at Bear Valley once used was the difference between, I'm trying to think of the terms he used. I think he was using connection or some sort of being joined and then being truly unified. And the way he described it was, you can take two cats and tie their tails together. They will be joined together, but they will not be unified. And it's that singular purpose that goes with it. And he kind of gets really worked up about that. He talks about Jesus' prayer. Now, Jesus' prayer in John 17, at the late part there, verse 21 around there, where it's he prays for himself, he prays for the disciples with him, then he prays for Christians in general. It's the three parts of the prayer. It's a cool chapter. He wants us to be unified, but it's not just that we're unified so that the world can see us, which is a key element of it. The nature of the unity, be unified as he and the Father are one, that we might be one as he and the Father are one. That is a tall, tall order, because are he and the Father of disparate minds or disparate goals? No. We don't even understand completely the nature of the Godhead, which is a study in and of itself that's like, I thought about doing that, but that would be pretty heavy after the Revelation. There's distinct, but they're one. They don't move in differing directions. That is the standard he wants for his followers. And Mike gets a little verbose about it, but he just kind of lays out a lot of the issues that he's just kind of ranting on the page, which is fine, about how he goes to places, and they don't get along. He references Acts 2 and Philippians 2 and 1 Peter 3, all talking about how the first century church, they were unified in purpose. They were following the apostles' teachings. Like right after the sermon in Acts 2, then they were gathering together, focused on what the apostles were teaching together. Philippians 2, be you of the same mind. Make my joy complete that you'll have the same mind. Phronane as the word, which is more, it's not just mental, it's purpose, focus. Attitude is another translation for it. He says, today's denominations choose to hold their own beliefs while accepting others which conflict, and that is tolerance. You can't accept A as being true and useful, and B, which is its exact opposite, which isn't true, and just say both are true. This is something we kind of go, This is something that you're going to be kind of familiar with. But he is, again, writing not necessarily to us directly as an audience. He's writing to those like him who are in that situation, coming to that realization. Denominationalism is division and so forth. It actually causes disdain from the world. Non-believers see this division and this fight, and they see the hypocrisy, they see the challenges, and they say, all these people, and they can't agree on what they're supposed to do. Why would I be a part of that? Which is the opposite, in essence, of Christ's prayer. Be unified so the world can see that you're mine. In this case, be ye divided so they know that you're not, if that makes sense. It's unfortunate. So this all sets up the next Monday morning. There's a lot of this filler, which is good. It's color. So like, he stopped for coffee. The machine didn't work, so he was going to get at the vending machine at work. That's when he runs into Randall again. Randall had been the one from the church who had been studying with him this whole time, if you have forgotten. And he goes to him and says, I have a spiritual dilemma that I want to bring up to you. He's trying to deal with these disparate thoughts. And Randall uses that as an opportunity. He's starting to say, okay, I think we've gotten him to the point where we can start talking about the gospel. So he asks him, do you know the Lord's church still exists today? That's an interesting phrasing. How do you think a lot of people would react to that? Do you know that the Lord's church exists still today? It's kind of an odd question. Most people are like, well, of course it does. They're churches. No. The Lord's church. Why do you think Randall is going possibly there at this particular point? Okay. He knows he's searching. He hasn't found what he wants. He hasn't found what's real. And so what is the temptation? Perhaps, what is he saying? He's fed up, right? Now it's like, oh, wait, don't give up. She still exists today. He's going to use this as a starting point to talk about the church. The problem is Mike still has issue with that. He's like, that's too narrow-minded. It's kind of funny, the internal struggles he's having and the things he'll say, because they contradict. Well, that's too narrow-minded, just to say that there's only one and only one way. But there is, and you've been saying that for chapters, Mike. I don't like what's going on, but that's very human. Randall responds with, narrow is the way, straight is the path, narrow is the way, there's the gate. Few will find it, and so forth. And Mike asks for that reference, of course, from the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 7. He says he'll look it up later. So Mike then brings up what had happened earlier with the Lutheran minister. That description in, maybe I should visualize it a little bit for you. False, 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 false. I'm emphasizing this was told to him falsely. John 15. I am the vine, ye are the branches, the teaching that Christ is the vine and the branches are the different denominations. That's a very common teaching. It's insane. It doesn't work. It's I am a plant and ye are many disparate plants that are fighting one another and aren't the same plant. No plant works that way. But Mike just regurgitates this back. But that's what I've been told. And Randall actually kind of laughs a little bit. He chuckles. He says, who told you that? It was probably some high-paid denominational preacher. I was like, ooh. Mike answers it was the Lutheran minister, and Randall explains it's people that are the branches. He says men, people, that Jesus is the vine and people are the branches. I would say contextually, he is the vine and the 11 apostles who are there, save Judas, are the branches, and then they goes from them. But that's a minor quibble. The idea is still the same. It just, there's some interpretation things that are later with that you can run to some weird place. Either way, it's not differing groups, right? To us, we're like, duh, right? But to him, he's like, I never heard it that way. He says he's going to check it, but he knows it's right. And that's when Randall goes and gets his Bible and brings out and shows him 1 Corinthians 1, 10 through 13. The section where Paul is writing to Corinth about the report he got from Chloe and her people about the divisions that existed in Corinth. One says, I am of Apollos. One says, I am of Cephas. One says, I am of James. And one says, I am of Christ. Cephas being Peter. And what he points out is this is kind of a nascent example of what denominationalism became in one little congregation. It's a good area to go to. They don't like it much. The one piece of it I always thought was interesting in that section in 1 Corinthians 1 is I've always wondered if Paul was applauding or criticizing the one that says, I am of Christ. You might think, well, why would he be criticizing him? Because he was still considering himself one among many. If you get where I'm going with that, it's like, well, you can do your thing. I'm going to say, no, we're all with Christ or not. Right? It's interesting because I'm going to stop me as we roll, because I'm just kind of going through the conversation they have, and I keep thinking, well, I'd say this, or we go this way, and different things. He goes to verse 13 and focuses on that Paul was trying to keep them from apostasy. And Mike doesn't know what that term means. Everyone here, what does apostasy mean? Yeah, just it's one of those churchy words, for lack of a better term, that's misused by a lot. It's really just falling away. It's wandering away. False teaching. It's anything that's different, really. It's not big, small, or otherwise. It's any of it. He defines it for Mike. And Randall puts everything together about avoiding division, one mind, just do it Christ's way, his way. And then Mike Mike confuses him because Randall's on a roll here. He thinks he has it. So it's like, okay, you're having problems with all these denominations. You have seen it firsthand. There's something better. Okay? This was something that was even in the first century of this problem. And Paul said, don't do this. There's one. And Mike says, but I'm a musician. I'm a musician. You're like, what? Randall gets confused. But Mike's complaint is you don't use instruments in your church. He is still attached to the things that are still, he doesn't realize it, but still attached to the things to which he is used to and enamored with. So Randall makes a deal with him. And this is going to set up something that'll come. He says, you know what? Okay. Give me 5 lesson times. They're going to set them up on Mondays for an hour. 5 studies. After that, it's up to Mike, whatever he wants to do. Continue. Not. Randall will then let it go. Is that a good thing to do? Why? And this isn't meant to put you on the spot, and this is actually rhetorical. This isn't right or wrong thing. It's just more just exploring. What do you think?
You've got him already thinking
Okay.
and making decisions. Now you can start teaching.
Okay. Why limit it, though?
You can see the end. It's not going to drag out forever.
Okay.
Or at least so he thinks.
I don't disagree with it either. I'm just doing the other side element. Well done, John.
One thought is at that point, that question is so disconnected in certain ways with what they've been studying, you can't just answer it on the spot and clarify the issues and make sense out of it.
Yep.
The question needs consistent, in-depth study over a period of time.
He is realizing, that his comment deals with instrumental music, which can be it's an important yet difficult issue to really get into, especially with someone that's not as grounded. There are many in the church, if you ask about that, have no opinion nor idea the background of it. It's actually it's not fun. It's a fun little study, but I'll do that sometime. But it didn't fit the flow there. He could have just jumped on that subject, but he needs to set some foundation. So John, and then.
So, I think it's a good thing because after 5 studies, you spend 5 studies together, you either have in your mind, I'm going to move forward or I'm not going anywhere. I'm done with it.
Okay.
So this gives you that opportunity to really get into some meat and see where you want to go from there. See if you're hungry for some more, if you're just like,
Okay.
whatever.
Doyle?
Years ago, I had this exact same study with a young man who was a friend of my niece. He was a musician, and we were studying the same things. He is today an elder in a pretty good-sized church.
Okay. That's interesting.
We encountered and dealt with
It will come up because it's I don't want to say unimportant or make it seem unimportant. It's outward though. It's something that's very noticeable and visible. That's different than what most people are used to, and so they'll ask about it. Putting a limit on it, assuming he has in his head exactly what his plan is, that's key, isn't necessarily a bad thing. There is a school of thought that says you never close any doors, and he wouldn't be totally doing that. But you never close any doors. The thing is, you have to direct them toward wanting to do something at a certain point. Christ, when he interacted with people, and that was again before the gospel came, but even in his ministry, he needed people then. He would be like, okay, I'm confronting you with this thing now. I don't have all the time in the world. You don't have all the time in the world. And there are other people to reach. So that might be part of it. Now, Mike is concerned, though. He's like, after this, will we still be friends? Because he has in his head, perhaps Randall will just, lay these 5 out, and if he doesn't go with what he's laid out, that they'll just break and ruin things. Like, of course we'll still be friends. He's not closing that door and that relationship, and it could still be built upon. So they set up for February 29th, because it was a leap year, 1988, and they're going to have some Krispy Kremes. The 23rd chapter is pretty short. It's just kind of a lot of, well, it's an interaction that gets his wife really mad. It actually makes her open to want to be a part of this study later on. There's some color. They picked up Italian to go. Got a tiramisu, all this stuff. Details are whatever. They get home. They're settling things down. The phone rings. And he points out there is something they didn't have in 1988. Caller ID. So she picks up the phone. Hello? Hold a second. Mike's here. Hands it to him. And she watches him talk. And all that is recorded is his side of the conversation. No thanks. You don't need to call back. Because we've withdrawn our membership from the Baptist church. I'm in a Bible study with a man who's a member of, and it's Randall's congregation. Excuse me. And then hangs up the phone. She is very curious about what just happened. What do you think just happened? It's very sad. They hadn't been attending at the place. Remember, their pastor there, he tried to get a meet with just to ask a biblical question, and he had a hard time doing it, and the guy barely gave them the time of day, didn't remember their names. He was arrogant and gruff and blew them off. Self-important, and his question was deemed beneath him. It's like, oh, well, the history of the Baptist church is John founded it. Look at Matthew 3. I'm like, okay, whatever, because it's crazy. That's who was calling. They hadn't been there in 4 months. He had not seen them, and he was checking up. Why do you think he was checking up? Wow, you are really cynical. You are also right. They were having a fundraiser for a new family life center, and they hadn't been contributing since they'd been gone, so he was calling to see if he could help contribute. He wasn't calling to check up on their spiritual well-being, their physical well-being, why they hadn't been there. He remembered their name finally, because the one thing he had left them with was, we're leaving, and the only thing you're going to miss from us is our check. The pastor hung up on him when he mentioned the church where Randall's at. Mike had planned actually to tell him, I learned about Matthew 3, by the way. Something he was going to throw it back at him. But instead, the pastor called Randall's church a bunch of water dogs. This is actually new to me. I hadn't heard that before. Water dogs. I'm assuming it's the baptism element of it, but I'm just like, that's fun. And then hung up on him. So it's kind of crazy that this happened. But it just happened right when they're at this tipping point. And he's already in a particular mindset. He's fed up, as he said, right? But now his wife, she's there too. She's like the gall of this man. He called up after all this, and when he hears they're studying with another group, calls them derogatory names and hangs up, and knows he's not going to get his money. I don't know. It's an interesting little event that happens in the midst of all of this. But it's going to put her in a mindset to be more open to It's true. It's true. This guy was a mess. And it comes from, well, he goes into it in the next chapter, a bit about the notion of, and that'll be the 5:30. That one was pretty short. It's chapter 24, the notion of people not asking questions, just taking things at face value. But that's coming up, because that sets up him going out with Ryan, who we saw. Ryan, connected friend. There's only so much said about him. I kind of just used to set up, oh, I just did that. To set up something else that's going to come. Janetta, his wife, was going to be busy, and he didn't want to be home alone, just bored, so he goes out with Ryan, who comes from a pretty affluent family. They're politically connected in Nashville. He can get into places. He gets him into the Polaris, which was a big fancy club in Nashville with a rotating, I guess the whole restaurant or club rotates. Kind of like, I guess, the rotunda on the Space Needle, if anyone's familiar with that. I never went up there. Been there a bunch of times. But yeah, it slowly turns, which is apparently, he's pretty frank about, you get drunk and that would confuse you because things move and such. And he could always get served even though he was only 20. He wasn't 21 yet. But they're sitting at the bar, they're discussing Nashville politics. And it's just kind of the little flavor of color, I suppose. And Ryan introduces him to a family friend, Joe M. Rogers, who's the current ambassador to France and had been for 3 years under Reagan. This guy had some major connections to the area there, built a whole bunch of hospitals, all these different things. He helped fundraise for Reagan in '84, appointed ambassador to France. They're talking about making him the Secretary of Commerce. It's like, okay. It's just some details he throws in there. But he's talking with this guy, and he's struck by the sincerity of him. Apparently he's a really good dude, very real guy. Which is interesting for a politician. That's all I'm going to say. It's curious. But he has this kind of interaction, and then when he leaves, when this Mr. Rogers, yes, leaves, he warns Mike that Ryan's going to try to get him into politics. So Mike decides to change the subject. And this will kind of set up his discussion, his kind of line of thinking for the rest of it. He asks Ryan, why do people hold a set of beliefs without ever checking them? Now, he has his in mind, obviously, religious beliefs are the most important ones. But this is actually true for a lot of things in life. And being curious is a good thing for life and for the truth, right? True. You don't want to be going against the stream. You don't want to be different. That is true. But it's interesting to think of, and he doesn't quite go there. He just is trying to bring up that subject without it being that subject with Ryan. He's just kind of using a general term. But it's true to where if you have an attitude that is a little more go with the normal thinking on everyday things, you're more apt to do the same with the very important things. It's this kind of social inertia, for lack of a better term, right? Ryan has a very interesting answer for him, is what I'll say. He says, are you familiar with Mein Kampf? That's an interesting thing to bring up in a conversation. Mike's like, yeah, that's Hitler's book, right? Written in 1925 while he was in prison. Sort of in prison. He had a pretty nice time there. That's a whole other thing. And Ryan's like, yeah, it means my struggle. He has a point, but it's like, he explains that inside of it, big book, and included Hitler's grand political ideology, among a lot of other things. But there is a thought in there. In it, Hitler plainly states the idea that repeated shrewd lies people can believe. If you repeat, I'm trying to figure out the way it's phrased. If you repeat a lie enough times, it can be believed. If you repeat a shrewd enough lie enough times, people will believe that hell is heaven, I think is basically the quote. And that's the idea of propaganda. You just keep repeating something enough, people will start to accept it, even if it's an inversion of reality. And unfortunately, it is true. And was used for very evil purposes, but that doesn't discount its reality. You can convince people that up is down, that left is right, that evil is good and good is evil, if you repeat the lie often enough. Yeah. Goebbels used that. It's a very interesting place to go, I guess, as a source, but it's an evil source with an evil idea that's a very dangerous thing. And then Mike says he considered that Ryan was onto something. They eat their meal. Mike wants to get home. It's 8 o'clock. He doesn't want to be out in traffic and different things. And so this is all setting up his thinking. On the drive home, he considers, why had he never questioned what he had been taught? Why had I never questioned what had been given to me? Why had I never thought about these things? Why had I never even just asked? Pure didactic method. Good teaching helps people to ask their own questions. And I will say that there are some that don't like that. And I'm not going to try to. I'm not trying to pick on anyone. I'm speaking generally here. There's a certain generational element of it. There was a generation in the church that wasn't big on questions either, and I think we paid for that with a generation that turned aside. I don't know the details, but I do know my dad, when he was a teenager, had some big questions, and they said, because that's what we do, and never answered them. That's not a good thing. Does the Bible fear questions, honest questions? Why not? That's how you learn. We can get institutionalized if we're not careful too, in that sense of this is what we do because, and you never learn the why. Why is a very important part. You teach the what and you teach the why. You can see that in Paul, and he's interacting with Titus and with Timothy and how they were supposed to teach others as an example and showing the why. I'm kind of there, but this is kind of what he's talking about. He's talking about his own experience with the Baptists and falsehood. I'm just saying that we aren't immune, even in the church, from this, even if you're teaching what's right, that we fail to answer questions. Do answer questions. Questions are good things. Honest questions. There's no bad honest question. Just putting it out there. If you ever have a question, right? What he comes to the conclusion, the reason he never questioned anything is that the answers came from people he trusted. And is that so bad? On its face. I mean, it's dangerous, but is it unnatural? Maybe I put it in those ways. Is it unnatural to not take answers from people you trust?
The way everybody's growing up.
That is.
Mom and dad says this, you take it as that.
And generationally, it's more common in a high-trust society. Now, we've become less that. People have become more cynical because they've been burned by people they trust. The world has made some promises it can't keep. Science is not God. It's not going to save you from death. There isn't a perfect world. Utopias don't exist. Trying to make a perfect world has killed more people in the 20th century than in all of history.
And they don't teach it in school, they're afraid of it.
Yeah. But he didn't question. His faith originated from trusted people, and the church those people attended. It was cyclical. It was inertia. It influenced his younger years and his early life. And people who attended, they were trustworthy. They were honest. They were generally good and moral. They weren't perfect, but no one was. But they weren't They weren't seeking to harm him. They were well-meaning, well-intentioned. What do we say about good intentions? They can be very dangerous things. They also relied, typically in these groups, on one man, the pastor. He would tell the people what the Bible said on a matter. He would have the answers. He would have all the things. Is there anything wrong with having someone who is an expert in these things? No. But he is, but a singular source isn't the biblical model. First off, for leadership. And secondly, that role is meant to be as an example and a teacher to encourager and an encourager to help to know how to study yourself and to grow and mature as examples yourselves, not the source of all knowledge. It's a dangerous, dangerous thing. Paul didn't want to be the source of all knowledge. He can't spread himself that thin as an apostle. He wanted others to help with that, and them teach others, teach others, teach others. Why? Why do you teach others? So they can teach others. Students become teachers. Maybe not masters. We all have our own talents, but teachers. But in these systems, it really would put a lot of vested control in a singular point. Be it a priest, be it a reverend, be it a... That model is so common, and it's common, I don't think by accident. It's not biblical.
That's how monarchies get so bad. Everybody just assumes whoever's got the title is to be followed.
Well, that's true. He who is best fit to lead shouldn't, or doesn't want to. And he who wants to is usually the last person you want. Except for one perfect monarchy, ergo theocracy, and that's the church. The church is a theocracy. We have a king. He's Jesus. Sometimes you have to remind people of that. But if the pastor becomes an heir, the probability is high that the church will follow, even if it's unintended, even if it's not like malicious, because that's your point of failure. And he's getting his answers from a hierarchy that's been created where they all vote on what they believe anyway in most of these places. He's not going to buck the system at all because then he'd be kicked out of said system. It becomes a very, you have a major point of systemic failure. There's a reason the church is meant to be autonomous. That interconnectivity is it's dangerous. We can interact anyway. That's its own discussion. So, but again, why they trust him because of his authority, and that word is a dangerous thing. But they claim an authority they don't necessarily always have. Look at that guy that he was interacting with. Where was that? This is what it says because that's what it is. How dare you question me, you plebe? You're the little people. Give me money. Why won't more people question what they believe? Because and he carries it forward to all this. They trust and they divest it, but they also don't want to spend the time to learn themselves. There's a certain I don't want to say laziness, but there's a certain convenience to hiring it to someone else to take care of for them. If it's a priest, that's the ultimate, like, oh, you're my go-between with God with their system. I don't even have to think at all. And if it, anyway. He gives a series of examples of how he accepted things in this way. I mean, there's a whole list he just runs through really quick in 24. Where is it? Yeah, there's the bullet points there. It's like, boom, boom. I believe all these things that aren't true just because someone said so, and I didn't even think. I didn't even ask. Denomination is permitted. Jesus is the vine, denominations are the branches. Everyone in all churches will go to heaven. Salvation is by faith alone. The sinner's prayer is God's method of saving mankind, and so on. All the things he's been discussing so far. He didn't know because he spent his entire lifetime cutting the end off the ham. He gave that example earlier about how in a generation, this one woman cuts the end off the ham because her mother did, and her mother did it because her mother couldn't fit a ham in their pot, so she would cut it off. And it's just continued monkey see, monkey do type of behavior. He then compares that notion with how believers really should react, and he talks about the Bereans in Acts 17. an interesting little group outside Thessalonica. When Paul goes to the synagogue there, for the first time, he isn't kicked out and yelled at. They actually accept him. They're more noble-minded in Berea because what did they do when Paul brought in teaching that was new to them? They compared it with Scripture to see that it was so. He said that's the attitude that has been lost. Someone suggests something, they teach something, you compare it with what's there and see that it is so. He'd allowed himself, let's see, it says when he got home, he realized he was now digging into the Bible, which is something he'd never done. He'd allowed himself to be taught without thinking, without questioning. He lists several things which were taught that turned out to be lies. And he talks about the telling of half-lies and such as being a very clever strategy of Satan. You change one word, thou shalt not die, surely die. He says, he points out that the denominations all have an element of truth in them. They're not 100%. There's enough there, and then you mix in the rest of it, and that's always the most effective way to cause problems. An obvious lie stands out. A half-truth can be a very, very dangerous thing because it sounds believable. What is the best way to pervert God's word and twist the truth? Lead man to division. It's in there. And he kind of emphasizes a lot of that and then goes back to Matthew 7. How many will say, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and so forth. And he closes with, it's easier to believe a lie that has been told 1,000 times before than to believe a truth that has never been heard before. Because it's new, it's different, and it's not what you know. This sets the stage for what will be the 5 studies. That'll be the next 5 chapters, which would be kind of our hanging stopping point. Any thoughts? I know I just kind of, some of these, I wish I had a better like, wah, but he just kind of stops. Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of people have this thought, and I've heard it voiced before, but there's many paths. So all of these different denominations still claim that the core is Christ.
Yes.
They still all believe that Christ is the path to God. And so for someone who is unlearned in Scripture, maybe they've gone to church, some
Mm-hmm.
but really never really studied or learned a lot, They don't, they just think that those different denominations, when they're all still based on Christ.
That's true, and that's the.
And then you mentioned about the half-truth.
Uh-huh.
Because, and some of these preachers, priests, whatever, they're very sincere.
They are.
They really,
They've been trained in it.
they're not all like,
No, they're not all like this guy. They're committed because it's what they know and it's what they've been told.
I think that's one of the reasons that some people have a problem with the Church of Christ.
That can be true because they don't understand. They don't want to take it as seriously as it needs to be taken. There's some different problems that people have. What gets weird to me is sometimes, though, you'll have students, like biblical students, scholars, these guys that are one of the best papers on instrumental music and why it doesn't belong is like an 87-page dissertation written by an Episcopalian, believe it or not. It's amazing. And he doesn't even follow it. He just spent all this time to research what they did in the first century, and he lays it all out. And then he says, but that's then, this is now. And you're just like, what? Cognitive dissonance is a pretty powerful thing, to take what you know and make it fit. Now, this system also with this I'm the vine, this is a somewhat later invention teaching. There was a time when the denominations in their inception, when they started to break from each other and break from Catholicism, were quite hostile to one another, in the sense that they were at least consistent in the notion that they thought they were right and that the other group wasn't, and they would confront one another. The problem was they found that it was easier to reach a mass audience by boiling down their doctrine to the least common denominator and appeal to the masses. And so they kind of went this direction. Now we have, what, 300-400 denominations just in the U.S. alone? It's crazy. Yeah. John, did you have a hand?
So I was going to mention, pattern theology. If you study what the early Christians did and you pattern your worship services after that,
Mm-hmm.
things fall into place pretty well. But I think people today have decided, well, times have changed.
Yeah.
Culture has changed. So we'll add a little bit to it, and that's okay. Like we talked about this morning in the book of Revelation. Maybe we'll add to the Bible a little bit. Maybe we'll take a little bit away because after all, this is the 20s. This is the 2020s.
Yeah, it is current year, yes. It's current year, people. Yeah, there's nothing new about that. The Enlightenment in the 1700s and 1800s birthed a bunch of our argumentation for those kind of things today. Oh, there weren't any miracles. That's just old superstition. We can explain it all with science. That's an 1850s idea. It's not new. But you're right. The problem with pattern theology, in and of itself, let's see, so we can find a figure that'll work. The pattern theology concept can give you how to put together the engine correctly. But without the actual faith and passion and life that comes with a relationship with Christ, there's no gas. Does that make sense? And we can become so enamored on making sure the engine looks right that we have nothing in it to run it.
But when we study the scriptures daily, when we search the scriptures daily, that faith grows.
Yeah. You have to have the heart with it. We've been accused of being cold and lifeless. In some congregations, that's fair. I hate to say it. Because they get so focused on pattern, they forget what the pattern is for. Again, it's about why, not just what.
So those are the congregations where when you're preaching up front, everybody in the auditorium is doing this, right? Have their arms crossed.
That's not fun to preach to, because you don't know how things are going. You're like, am I speaking English?
Well, some of us do it for other reasons, comfort, right?
Anyway. So, any other thoughts?
Sometimes we overreact because of the excesses of others.
Yes.
We go the opposite direction.
Balance, balance, balance. Balance is a very important thing. Just because someone does something weird doesn't mean you run in the other direction.
But we do.
If someone looses, you don't bind. If someone binds, you don't loose. You stay with truth. But we like church, I'm going to use this broad church history going back to the first century, and then even since the 1840s with Stone Campbell, are full of ebbing and flowing reactions to the left and to the right, for lack of better terms. And it's because we can't keep balance.
It's human nature.
It is. But what it requires is taking a breath. It requires spiritual maturity and not reacting, but acting with purpose and a sober mind. Being grown-ups, frankly, is what it is. And
Part of this, we look back at the time when we were in school, we had civics classes and things like that because they were teaching us how to be useful, productive citizens. And we're teaching them how to think. That's foreign to what's the way you talk to schools today.
well, that's a lot of what's. That's a conversation to itself because they want to be more anti-civic now. But anyway, that's a whole thing.
Well, it sets the foundation for, and it bleeds over into religion.
Yes, it does. And every society is like that. Every society has been like that. We just, Anyway, any thoughts? Other thoughts? Okay. Well, are there those that need to partake this evening? You guys need to? That's what I thought. Okay. Anyone else that needs to? Anything needs mentioned? It's good to see Felicia this morning. Glad she was able to at least get out, and hopefully she's doing better. And those that have also been dealing with some stuff. All right, well, if you would, let's close in a prayer. Father, we come before you at this time, thanking you for this time we've had to discuss, to look over a work of one of your servants, just kind of relating what his experience was. We know he's imperfect, just as all of us are, but it gives us kind of an opportunity to look over how we might interact with others, teaching about you, and to know what's in their mind, perhaps, from a perspective of someone who's being studied with, and to glean these things. We thank you for this time we've had. Lord, we just ask you to be with all those that are dealing with ongoing health issues, that they can have relief and that they can be emotionally and spiritually strengthened if they're not physically 100%, and those under the weather, that they can feel better and be back with us. Be with those that are traveling, keep them safe if it be your will, and be with us as we close and head back into this world. Remember that Sunday isn't the only day to remember you and to shine your light, but every day, and we can encourage one another each and every day as well as a family. Can we thank you for your Son and his example, his light, his sacrifice, your love, your patience. Please forgive us. It's in his name we pray.